On the Thursday episode of Locked On Hurricanes, it is time to open the mailbag and answer some questions. We look at a trade revisit with Jake Guentzel and the Pittsburgh Penguins, looking at Nikolaj Elhers and Karen Miller to see if that's enough for the offseason and should the Hurricanes make moves or not. And then what is the difference between NHL and AHL contracts, as there are some very significant differences between the two. That and more on a Thursday edition of Locked On Hurricanes.
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Thursday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everyday for making this your first listen of the day. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Elhers, also the co-host of the Surge Cast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all of my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. So on the Thursday edition of the pod, we are going to be opening the mailbag, looking at the Jake Guentzel revisit of the trade from the Pittsburgh Penguins to the Carolina Hurricanes. Would we keep it the same, or would things be a little different? And is Nikolaj Elhers and Karen Miller enough in terms of moves for the Hurricanes? Should they wait for the deadline, or should they make one more move this offseason? And then finally, what's the difference between NHL and AHL contracts for those who don't really know? Because I know a lot of people don't know the nuances of that, so we'll talk about it. However, before we jump into everything, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, going back to the Jake Guentzel trade coming from Pittsburgh to the Carolina Hurricanes, the Carolina Hurricanes gave up forward Michael Bunting, who's now with the Nashville Predators, Vasily Ponomarev, who's now back in the KHL. Then it's Ville Kuvanen, Cruz Lucius, and the rights, which was the rights to Cruz Lucius, the forward, as well as a conditional first in the 2024 draft, a conditional fifth rounder in 2024. And the Hurricanes also did get Ty Smith in part of the deal as well. And after, he is now going over to the KHL as well. And the question was actually brought up to me from a fellow, the hockey writers, beat writer covering the Pittsburgh Penguins, in Nick Kramer. He did ask me, would the trade package be any different compared to, say, if it was Bunting and more picks, or was it picks instead of prospects? Because the fact that he did ask, with Ville Kuvanen looking at someone who might be trying to make a role for the Carolina Hurricanes, and the fact that picks were, flipped for, Harrison Brunicki and stuff like that, and of course with Michael Bunting being flipped and stuff like that. So would it be any different? And for me, I don't really think would I do a trade package differently if it was like Michael Bunting and some picks, or is it picks instead of other prospects, and maybe not giving up guys like Ville Kuvanen and stuff like that, or Cruz Lucius, or even trade Michael Bunting? And for me, it's one of those things where I wouldn't necessarily go make that different package for that trade, because at the time Don Waddell thought the trade was going to be worthwhile, to go get him. And then, of course, unfortunately that summer, the Hurricanes, swapped Guentzel, for a draft pick. And it just kind of, for 2025. And it's just one of those things where I really wouldn't necessarily trade it. I wouldn't change anything in terms of the trade. I mean, at the time, Michael Bunting was good, but he just wasn't fitting the system, and they thought they could, they made a big swing for Jake Guentzel. Guentzel wanted to stay in Carolina. It's just unfortunate the cap, situation just didn't really work out, because it was going to be a tighter cap last season compared to this year, where we saw, all of that. Plus, the Hurricanes were trying to figure out, are they going to bring some of their other guys back? And, of course, you're also looking at taking care of the Jacob Slavin contract. Also, you're trying to worry about the Seth Jarvis contract and all that stuff too. So, what does that entail? And I think if you look at how, Jake Guentzel didn't get signed, but then you sign Seth Jarvis to his contract, which was a little bit less than $8 million, and you get Slavin, on what his new contract is now. But I think basically it's you essentially swapped a Guentzel contract for a Seth Jarvis completely full 8-year deal right then and there, instead of maybe having to shorten to a small bridge to keep him later on and make him sign maybe in a couple summers and stuff like that. You kind of got Seth's contract out of the way earlier. So that to be said, I really wouldn't change anything in terms of the contract. I mean, I like Vasily Ponomarev. It's just at the time they thought, if that was the package to get Guentzel, then so be it. And like I said, even then, like he's going back to Europe, which is kind of crazy to think about. Like it was not even like a full season after that he's gone. Nothing's really mentioned of Cruz Lucius very much. And yeah, I mean, you got one guy out of that whole trade in terms of Ville Kuvinen, who is actually probably doing something a little bit more out of that trade. And now Michael Bunting is with the Nashville Predators. We'll see how that works out. And of course, Guentzel got his big deal with Tampa Bay. So, I mean, just the guys that went back, I mean, you're at Michael Bunting on 1 year of his contract left in Nashville. You're looking at one guy went back to Europe, one guy you haven't really heard very much of, and then another one who could potentially make a Pittsburgh roster that's really all not that great, to be honest. They're like the only team right now that's still kind of selling in the offseason, and that's with the contracts going up and the cap and all that. So would I change anything? No. I mean, revisionist history, I just don't think there's anything to change. Like, if it's still Michael Bunting and different prospects, or would it be more picks? The Hurricanes aren't really a team that trades picks that much. I know this year they traded a lot more. Of course, they did it within the draft, and of course they traded a seventh rounder to get Keen Primo. They traded a first and a second to go get Keandre Miller. So they've used their draft capital a little bit differently than usual. But at the time, they aren't really a team that just goes and throws draft picks away and stuff like that. And, I think Michael Bunting was always going to be the guy that was going back in terms of, if you want an NHL guy now, we need an AHL guy coming back our way. And, there were some prospects, and that was their best prospects at the time that were maybe not the top tier, top three guys that you really liked at the time. But, Vasily was one of those guys that people liked, but, could he crack the roster? Who really knows? But in hindsight, I don't see where a different package could have worked to make the trade feel better for the Hurricanes. I think the trade was fine at the time for the Hurricanes. Yeah, you lost some guys that maybe some people liked, but in the end, they made a move, and I wouldn't say no one necessarily won the trade just because of the fact that it was just between Pittsburgh and Carolina. I mean, one of them, like both guys in that main trade are with different teams now than they were at the time of when that trade happened. One's going to Pittsburgh, one's going to Carolina. Now one's in Tampa and one's in Nashville, and different prospects went certain different ways of their careers, and draft picks are draft picks. So for me, I don't really see much of what would change, and do I feel differently about it? No, not really. I don't feel different about it. If anything, it just kind of staggers as a butterfly effect of how things happen. And instead of signing Jake Guentzel to his 8x8, you gave Seth Jarvis an 8x7.8 million contract, and you feel pretty good about it. So it's just one of those things where you locked up one of your guys that you really like in Seth Jarvis long term earlier than expected without giving him a bridge. And now you look at a team that got Nikolaj Elhers, and I think you feel really good about that, having a guy like that on the roster. And, it's no point of going for hindsights or revisionist history or all things would be different if this happened. It's just at the time they thought it was a deal that could work, and they made the trade. And then, subsequently stuff went differently for both teams, and that's just where they are now. So for me, no, I don't feel any different about it. I wouldn't change the trade package or anything like that. So big thank you to that question. So now we're going to move on to talking about Nikolaj Elhers and Keandre Miller once again. Is this enough? So for this offseason, should the Hurricanes make more moves? Well, stick around and we'll talk about it here in a second on a Thursday edition of Locked on Hurricanes. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to the ball game with friends and family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and the lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Tired of the endless scrolling trying to find the best deal? Well, Game Time's zone deals pick the best seats in your section for you. Their seat view right in the app before you buy, so you know exactly where you'll be. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONAHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. Another question that I got asked was, is this enough for Nikolaj Elhers and K'Andre Miller for the Hurricanes this offseason? Do the Hurricanes make another move in the offseason, or should this be during the season, getting closer to the trade deadline? And I think with where the Hurricanes are at right now, you're talking $10.64 million in cap. They got 44 standard out of the 50 contracts they're allowed to have on their books. And I would say for the Hurricanes, yes, you could go make some extra moves. It's just the only other real question mark on the team is their second line center. Now, does that mean they keep Jesperi Kotkaniemi there? Do they look for someone else within the roster? Is it a Logan Stankoven? Is it a Seth Jarvis? I've seen some people say, why not bring up Brian Suzuki and see what he can do at 2C? I mean, he had he was the most healthy that he was in his entire career, but is he ready for that jump? I'm not really sure. He's only played a couple games in the NHL. That's a big ask unless he shows out in training camp. But let's say for right now, with the current roster they have, I don't see Mark Jankowski as a 2C. Tyson Jones is in a 2C. You could make room if you move Jordan Stahl down to the 4C, maybe making KK the 3C, but I just don't see the Hurricanes doing that. They really want Jordan Stahl to be there as the 3C, as the captain, unless they move KK down to the fourth line and throw him on the wing or make him fourth line center. Then maybe, like I said, do you move Stankoven to second line center? Is it Jarvis? Knowing for the fact that Kotkaniemi still has 5 years left on his contract, and even that's only $4.82 million. So it's not really the worst contract. It's just, unfortunately, it's not a contract you're really kind of happy about with the production you get out of a 2C. Now, yes, he does bring some other intangibles that are not on the score sheet. Like, he does win a lot of faceoffs. He is over 50% in the faceoff dot, which is good for the Carolina Hurricanes, who are known as a team who wins a lot of faceoffs. Sebastian Aho, Jordan Stahl, of course, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and it helps when you have a 2-time Selke winner and Rod Brind'Amour being your head coach, helping you in that asset. And KK has been getting a little bit more physical over the last couple of years. He's definitely grown into a more defensive center than what people thought of as a third overall pick. I mean, you really can't blame the guy for where he gets picked. Montreal viewed him in this certain way. Wasn't a skill set, got maybe drafted a little bit higher than where he should have been, but nothing he can do about that. And there's been a lot of expectations on a guy who was drafted third overall. Is that fair to him? No, but I think they viewed him as a different player compared to maybe what his skill set is. So yeah, I think he brings a lot of intangibles. It's just not the intangibles you want as a second line center when you really need a guy in the 2C spot that can score goals, make assists, and put up more than 30 odd points in a season. You need a second line center that might get you 50, 55 points a season. That's what you're kind of really looking for, is a guy to help be a complementary piece to your 1C and drive your second line. So I wouldn't really blame Kotkaniemi for that. It's just unfortunately how the circumstances fell down. And like I said, his contract isn't bad. It's just, unfortunately right now, it just doesn't meet the expectations you're asking for of a guy to play a 2C making that much money. But I can see where the Hurricanes like, hey, we got 5 years left on his contract. He's still he's 25. Let's see what he can do, because he's still young. Even though he's played in the AHL for a long time, maybe this is a We'll give him one more shot as the second line center. If it's not working out by the deadline, maybe there's a team that's willing to take 4 years and a handful of games left of his contract, and maybe that's a move where you look at the deadline being, hey, we tried, it didn't work. There's 4 years left at 4.82. The cap's still going up. Some team needs a guy. We're just going to send you here. So I can see where the Hurricanes look at Kotkaniemi being maybe a trade deadline piece. That being said, that could be a situation where Elhers and Miller could be the big main additions to the Hurricanes, and that's not including the extension of Logan Staykoven, the re-signing of Eric Robinson to his $1.7 million over the next 4 years. You bring in Frederick Anderson back. You bring in Tyson Jost back. You brought all your RFAs back. In terms of other big names coming to Carolina, unless something happens between now and October 9th, I mean, that's still a long ways away from July 24th until now. I think anything is possible where you could see another move for the Hurricanes. I don't see it on the defense. I don't really see it in goaltending because they basically have 6 goalies right now from the NHL, AHL, and ECHL level. If there's another move, it's going to be for the forwards. I would expect probably a second-line center, but if nothing happens between now and October 9th, this could be it. This could be Elhers and Miller as the big additions with some of your re-signings and some extensions, and then maybe the Hurricanes make another big move at the deadline. Maybe that's where you see, they do bring in a forward. Maybe it is that second line center to replace just Barry Kotkaniemi if he's out the door, or they move him down on the roster, and maybe there's some other assets they trade off to go get that guy. So I think as of now, this summer, this could be it. I think the Hurricanes might be done unless something happens because you never know. The Hurricanes surprised a lot of us with the Keandre Miller trade. I think they could surprise us one more time if they feel like, hey, we have $10.64 million. There's one more question mark on the roster. Let's go take care of it. And maybe they do that. And then it's a moot point. And then there you go. There's the other big addition. But I also can see them being like, no, we're fine with where we're at right now. We're going to go into the season, give it a few months, see where we're at. Then maybe by March, maybe by the Winter Olympics break, maybe things will change like they did when they got Mikko Rantanen and Taylor Hall. They got him in January, right before that really long break. Maybe they wanted to give another trial run to someone else they bring in and see where it goes from there. So maybe they can run that back one more time. But I feel like that was a good thing to do, especially if there's a long break involved. And then, or you could look at it as hey, we'll see how it goes by the trade deadline and go from there and make our big move for our guy then and see what happens after that. So I can really see it going either way. If they do say this is it, this is Elhers and Miller, and that's it, I'd be fine with it. I think that's a great addition, 2 great additions to the team. It definitely puts you in a better spot than you were last year. You've gotten, somewhat younger. Contracts are definitely a lot better as well, and I think it puts you in a really great spot in the next season where you got your top 6 winger that you really wanted, guy you can throw in your power play one. Your defense definitely did get younger. You go from Orlov and Burns to now it's going to be Nikishin and Miller. And Miller's contract is pretty dang good, all things considered, for $7.5 million. It's a gamble, but for a guy who's got more physicality, more offensive upside, say he's only 25, so you got him right in his prime right now, and just give him time to work with the Hurricanes, who are basically blue line whisperers with all the guys they've brought in recently, and even their homegrown guys. You feel pretty good about it. Maybe if those are the 2 main additions, along with all those extensions and re-signs, I feel pretty good about it, all things considered. So, like I said, it could be different. They could go get someone, but if this is it, still nothing wrong with that. The Hurricanes I think, are still probably the odds-on favorites to win the Metro Division, a team that's definitely looking at at least another Eastern Conference final appearance, and then hopefully make their first Stanley Cup final since 2006. So, I think expectations are definitely high for the Hurricanes this year, regardless if they go make another move or stand pat. So it should definitely be interesting how all of that works out. Now, all that being said, we talked about a revisit to the Jake Guentzel trade a year later. We're talking about Nikolaj Elhers and Keandre Miller. Are they enough? Should the Hurricanes go get more? Now let's talk about the difference between NHL and AHL contracts and how all that kind of gets figured out. Because I know there's a lot of intricacies of how things happen and what's the difference between the two. How can it work out bringing guys up to the AHL? What's the difference if it's just AHL contracts? We'll explain all that. So stick around. We'll talk about it in a second on a Thursday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. So this was a question that was brought up to me, not on social media, but just from, someone I know. And they asked, what's the difference between an AHL and an AHL contract? Because they know that there are two-way deals for, guys playing in the NHL and the NHL, or can AHL teams just go get their own guys? How does that work out? Or is it just prospects from the NHL team? So this is a great off-season topic. Just say, hey, if you don't know at all, if you're still kind of new to it, or maybe you don't know the difference, or maybe you're new to hockey and want to know what the difference is between NHL and AHL contracts, that's what these episodes are about. It's to help you guys understand more, and maybe if you don't know, or you need a quick refresher. So the difference between AHL and AHL contracts. So NHL one-way, two ways. It's pretty simple. If you're looking at it as a one-way, it's just, hey, this is your one salary amount, and that's it. And then, if you have to go down to the AHL, you have to go through waivers and all of that stuff. If it's a two-way deal, this is where it's different. And the ELC is always a two-way deal for entry-level contract, and the minor league salary is capped around $70,000, $75,000. Now, the difference with that is, too, some are exemptions, some are in terms of the two ways, but mainly a lot of them are two-way exempt deals going down and stuff like that. But if it's a one-way NHL, that's your set amount, but you have to go through waivers and all that stuff. You might be claimed within a certain amount of time frame to get that figured out. Like I said, if it's an entry-level contract, you're fine. No big deal in terms of that. It makes it a little bit easier. Now, that is if it's controlled only by the NHL team. So you're looking at guys who are under team control. Like you're looking at like a Skylar Brindamore, Dominic Finsoy, Ronan Seeley. Those guys are on two-way deals. That means the Hurricanes can call them up, send them back, and all of that stuff. They're able to move them back and forth between the NHL and the AHL. The difference is if it's just a straight-up AHL deal. AHL deals aren't necessarily public with their contracts. You kind of know structurally where they're supposed to be at, but some of those aren't really put out there. That's where the AHL teams fill out the rest of the roster because there's no roster constraints. There's no salary cap unless it's for the playoffs, for the Calder Cup, postseason and all that. During the regular season, though, there's no really roster sizes. There's really no cap. It's just making sure that you have enough guys in your roster in case of call-ups, you can go and slide some guys in. Only AHL deals means that you can only play for the AHL club. That means the NHL contracts, you cannot call a guy up if you don't have them on your own deal. If, like, say, the Chicago Wolves go and sign someone, that is the Chicago Wolves guy. The Hurricanes can't necessarily touch them unless some other deals have to happen and go down behind the scenes or just how it gets figured out. But if you're only signed to an AHL deal, you are only owned by the AHL club. You can also get loaned to other AHL teams. You can get loaned out to ECHL teams and stuff like that. And it's not really going to affect the NHL team because that's not necessarily their controlled guy where it's like, no, you have to go to our affiliate and that's it. If you're on an AHL deal, AHL team can send you if they want you to loan you out somewhere without having to trade you. Now, there is a AHL two-way deal, which basically means, like for Tyler Weiss, former Raleigh guy who's now with the organization. He is signed with the Chicago Wolves. He's not a Carolina Hurricanes guy. That means he can't just be called up to the Hurricanes. His contract is specifically to the AHL club of the Wolves, but he can also get sent down to the now ECHL Greensboro Gargoyles and not have to be worried about getting taken away. It's basically like an NHL two-way, but now it's a AHL ECHL two-way. Same thing for EHL contracts. ECHL contracts are just with the ECHL team. However, they could potentially go up to the AHL club for other, circumstances of how things work out. But essentially, that's kind of the difference. NHL two-way deals means that you can go from the NHL to the AHL club and you can call it up and go back, call up and go back and stuff like that because the parent club owns your contract. They're on the hook for your contract, whether if you're playing in the NHL, where we've seen for some of the most recent deals, $775,000 if you play in the NHL, or other guys have gotten contracts where you're making $130,000, $80,000 per season outside of your ELC. Your ELC, you're capped at a certain dollar amount. If you're not in your entry-level contract, but you play in the AHL, you have your NHL contract number, and you got your AHL contract number. That's how it works. And that's if your parent club owns your deal. If you were just strictly an AHL contract, AHL club can't touch you. You are that AHL club's guy. So, like for Tyler Weiss, he has that contract with them. Hurricanes can't touch him. He is with the Wolves. And that's how he can go with the Wolves, go back down, come back up, go down, come back up, and stuff like that. That's how it would work in that instance. So I know it, like I said, and then, like I said, two-way deal, AHL, ECHL, that's how it goes out, or we can get loaned to our AHL club without being traded. There's a lot of other intricacies in terms of that CBA and how that works out in the American Hockey League, but that's kind of the main difference. Unless you were signed through the NHL club, the club can't really touch you. That's just how it works. If you sign exclusively an AHL contract, you are exclusively an AHL player. That's how it really is. Players who have AHL contracts who are playing in the AHL are not considered on AHL contracts. That's the difference. Because if you are on an AHL contract playing in the AHL, you are owned by that team. You are on an NHL two-way deal. AHL contract is strictly AHL with that club. That means teams have to go out and get their own guys outside of just prospects. It's not just straight up prospects because, unfortunately, not a lot of rosters are able to do that. Like the Hurricanes only are able to have 50 standard contracts. It would be kind of tough for them to have them try to do an entire AHL team and an entire AHL team as well and all that stuff. And they have certain guys in Europe and all that too. So the AHL team has to bring in their own guys too, because like I said, there's no roster limits. There's no cap limits as well. So they can go get a bunch of guys, but the AHL team is only allowed to have 50 guys on their contract. So they can't just necessarily have their whole NHL team and an entire AHL team under contract. It just doesn't work like that. So that's how it all kind of breaks down. There's a lot more nuances to it. I'm not really into the nooks and crannies type of guy, but this is kind of like the basic. This is how it works between NHL one ways, NHL two ways, strictly AHL contracts, AHL two ways, ECHL deals, and stuff like that. So if you're on socials, hit me up at OneTrueZach on X, hit me up at Elhers if you want a more detailed explanation of this. I know it's a lot, but this is kind of like, this is what you need to know of the difference between NHL and AHL type of deals. So that's kind of how it works out. And of course, there's a lot more CBA loopholes and rules and all the other type of stuff. And that is a very big CBA. And I know that's also changing for 26, 27 as well. And that's a whole different conversation. But that's kind of where you're at right now. So thank you to everyone who sent in questions. Hopefully we can do more of these later on in the summer because it's always cool to do more of refreshers. If there's any questions about the Hurricanes in general, love to do more of these as we move forward, as we get closer to the regular season. But that will do it for the Thursday edition of Locked On Mailbag. Thank you for making your first listen. Your second listen, check out the Locked On NHL podcast where there is no off season, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to keep up with me, I'm at OneTrueZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky at the Zachary Martin, where you can check out all of my links in my bios to find all of my written content at thehockeywriters.com. Just did a story on Sean Walker, why I think he is poised for a good second season in Carolina. If you want to keep up with the podcast, my other podcast, it's the Search Cast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. For Locked On Hurricanes, where you can find us on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Make sure to leave a 5-star rating and review because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, it's Locked On Hurricanes. Subscribe, hit the bell notifications so you don't miss a show. Hit the thumbs up so let me know if you like the show as well. Share with all their Caniacs to become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Thursday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. That'll be the last show for this week unless anything changes. So if not, we'll see you back on Monday. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.